Hello everyone, I'm very glad that you're joining this story. Subscribe, like and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
It was a Saturday evening painted in that heavy, tired gold of early autumn, where the sun sinks lower and the air itself feels like it's holding its breath, and I was sitting in the car in my mother's driveway, gripping the steering wheel tighter than I needed to, telling myself it was just dinner, just another of her little ceremonies to parade the family around like shiny trophies she could point at and say, "Look what I made, look what I own." My name's David, 43 years old, and no matter how many years pass, walking into that house always feels like stepping into a courtroom where the judge already decided the verdict before I even opened my mouth. Elaine, my mother, had been planning this birthday dinner for months, sending out passive-aggressive group texts about who was bringing what, setting little traps like assigning me dessert even though she damn well knew I didn't bake. And I guess that should have been my first clue that tonight wasn't gonna be just awkward family small talk and bad wine. My sister Samantha was already there when I walked in, standing by the fireplace with her husband Rick, whispering to each other in that way people do when they think nobody notices, but everybody does. Samantha had that stretched too thin look she always wore around Mom, the one that said, "Please approve of me, please notice me," while Rick, in his ever-present golf shirt and fake tan, just looked bored. Scrolling on his phone like the whole evening was some minor inconvenience before his next tea time. Uncle Bill was there too, of course, nursing a gin and tonic like it was the only thing tethering him to this miserable planet. Bill had always been the black sheep, at least compared to Mom's fantasy of what a brother should be, too loud, too rough around the edges, too unwilling to kiss the right asses when it counted. And then there was Chloe, my cousin, sitting stiffly at the dining room table, already picking at the flower arrangement like she was trying to rearrange her whole life with those wilted petals. The house looked exactly the same as it had since 1985, same heavy drapes, same faux crystal chandelier that rattled ominously every time a truck passed by outside. Same photos of Samantha's perfect wedding plastered on every surface, while pictures of me were either outdated, hidden, or missing entirely. Funny thing about those old family homes, they hold onto grudges better than people do. I took a deep breath, fixed my face into something between a grimace and a smile, and stepped into the living room, where Elaine was holding court like some queen fallen on hard times but too proud to notice her crown was crooked. She was wearing this peacock blue dress that looked expensive, but somehow cheap at the same time, too many bangles clinking on her wrists as she gestured and laughed just a little too loudly. When she saw me, there was that split-second flicker of annoyance before she stretched her arms out like I was the prodigal son, and for a moment I almost believed she meant it. "David, sweetheart," she cooed, pulling me into a hug that smelled of Chanel No. 5 and something colder underneath. "You made it after all." I was starting to wonder. I mumbled something about traffic and work and the usual excuses we all keep handy for times like these, but I caught Samantha's glance over Mom's shoulder, that subtle narrowing of the eyes that said she smelled bullshit from a mile away, but wasn't about to call it out, not tonight, not when appearances mattered more than truth. The dinner table was set with Mom's best china, the stuff she only dragged out for holidays, and when she wanted to impress people who secretly couldn't stand her. Roast beef, mashed potatoes, green beans almondine, the usual suspects lined up like soldiers awaiting inspection. But the food wasn't the main course tonight, and part of me knew it even then, even before I took my seat at the far end of the table, the seat furthest from Mom, like a chess piece she kept close enough to control, but far enough not to matter. The conversation started out the way it always did, a rundown of Samantha's latest real estate triumphs, Rick's golf scores, Chloe's new promotion at some tech startup none of us really understood. Every comment was a backhanded compliment, every smile a dagger hidden behind polished teeth. I played along, nodding at the right moments, laughing when expected, keeping my real thoughts buried deep where nobody could reach them, not even me. But there was a tightness in the room, a crackling undercurrent that no amount of polite chatter could mask, and when Uncle Bill knocked over his glass reaching for the bread basket, spilling gin all over Mom's pristine tablecloth, I thought for a second the whole brittle facade would shatter right there. Instead, Mom just laughed, a sharp, brittle sound, and waved it off like it was nothing, but her knuckles stayed white around the stem of her wine glass. It's funny how families can function like well-rehearsed plays. Everyone knows their lines, their marks, the exact moment to fake a laugh or fake concern. But if you listen closely, if you really listen, you can hear the rage and resentment bubbling underneath, like a pressure cooker waiting for one tiny slip to blow the whole thing sky high. As we ate, I caught little exchanges that didn't quite fit. The way Samantha flinched when Mom mentioned money, the quick glance Chloe shot Uncle Bill when someone brought up the family lake house, Rick's sudden cough when Mom talked about loyalty and gratitude. There were landmines buried under every topic, and for a moment I almost admired the way Mom navigated them, steering us away from explosions with the skill of someone who's been dodging emotional shrapnel her whole life. Still, something about tonight felt different, more dangerous. It wasn't just the usual barbs hidden in compliments, or the way Mom's eyes kept sliding past me like I was some waiter refilling her water instead of her son. It was in the way she kept glancing at the clock, as if counting down to something, as if the whole evening was just a setup for some punchline none of us saw coming. Maybe it was the way Chloe's hand trembled slightly when she passed me the butter dish, or the tight little smile Samantha gave when Mom said she was so proud of her perfect daughter. Maybe it was just the way my own gut twisted tighter with every passing minute, every fake laugh, every carefully curated story. I pushed the feeling aside, told myself I was being paranoid, told myself I could survive one dinner without digging up old wounds. I even managed a real smile when Mom clinked her glass and stood up, signaling that the toasts, her favorite part of any celebration, were about to begin. I didn't know it yet, but this wasn't going to be another forgettable night of forced laughter and polite misery. Tonight, the masks were coming off. Tonight, my mother had plans for me, and by the time dessert hit the table, nothing about our family would ever be the same again. Elaine always loved the sound of her own voice, especially when it filled a room packed with people who had no choice but to sit there and pretend they were honored to hear it, so it came as no surprise when she rose from her chair, tapping her wine glass with a butter knife like some dictator calling her court to attention. Her smile stretched wide and fake across her face, and the way she paused to let the room hush told me she had been rehearsing this moment for days if not weeks, savoring the chance to bask in the spotlight one more time. The conversations died down almost instantly, forks frozen halfway to mouths, chairs scraping slightly as people shifted to face her. The air thick with that nervous energy you get when you know a performance is about to start, but you're not sure if you are part of the audience or part of the show. Elaine lifted her glass high, a theatrical gesture she had perfected over decades of garden parties, charity luncheons, and PTA meetings where she ruled like a queen without a kingdom. "I just want to take a moment," she said, her voice trembling just enough to sound heartfelt, but not so much that anyone could mistake it for real emotion, "to thank all of you for being here tonight, for making this day so special for me." She paused to look around the table, her eyes lingering warmly on each face, that is, except mine, though she played it off so smoothly I almost doubted for a second that I had noticed it at all. First, she turned to Samantha, practically glowing under the heat of Mom's gaze, and launched into a syrupy speech about her incredible success, her devotion to family, her beautiful spirit. Samantha blushed and laughed in that modest, performative way she always did when receiving praise, even though I knew damn well she lived for moments like this, for Mom's approval served up in front of witnesses, like a glittering trophy. Next, it was Rick's turn, and Elaine praised his hard work and dedication and how he had brought stability and strength to the family, which was rich coming from a woman who once told me in private that Rick was about as useful as a screen door on a submarine. Rick gave a tight smile and a little shrug, playing the humble card while soaking it all in, the perfect son-in-law when the cameras were rolling. She moved down the line like a general pinning medals on soldiers, each toast dripping with carefully curated admiration. Uncle Bill got a mention for his charm and humor, even though everyone knew he had spent the better part of his life drunk or chasing doomed business ventures, and Chloe received gushing praise for being a shining example of the next generation. Despite the fact that Chloe was clearly dying inside, picking invisible lint off her dress and avoiding eye contact like it was a sport. The longer it went on, the tighter the knot in my stomach grew, the more acutely aware I became of the fact that my mother was saving me for last, as if she was building to some grand crescendo where she would finally acknowledge me, validate my existence. Maybe even offer an olive branch for all the years of cold shoulders and biting remarks. I told myself not to hope, not to expect anything, but some stupid, desperate part of me still clung to the idea that tonight could be different. Then, after she finished lavishing Chloe with praise, Elaine lowered her glass slightly, looked around the table with a satisfied smile, and said, "And to all of you, my wonderful family. I am so blessed." She sat down. Just like that. No mention of me, no glance in my direction, not even a passing nod to acknowledge that I existed at all. It was as if I had been airbrushed out of the family portrait, an inconvenient blemish she decided not to mention because it might ruin the aesthetic. For a second, I thought maybe she had just forgotten. Maybe there was still a toast coming. Maybe she was saving me for a private word later. But the way Samantha's face tightened and Rick suddenly found something very interesting at the bottom of his glass told me otherwise. They knew. They had known before tonight. I was the only one stupid enough to think this dinner was about celebrating family instead of staging a carefully orchestrated humiliation. I sat there, holding my wine glass in midair like an idiot, smiling stiffly as if I had somehow misheard, as if pretending nothing had happened could make it true. But inside, something cold and sharp twisted in my gut, and a slow-burning anger started to bubble up, not the explosive kind that makes you shout and flip tables, but the quiet, lethal kind that sits in your chest and whispers, "Wait. Just wait." Elaine picked up her fork and daintily sliced into her roast beef, conversation bubbling back to life around her. The moment passed, erased, overwritten by the next topic of forced small talk. But the damage was done. The wound was open and raw, and everyone at the table knew it. They just pretended not to see, because pretending is what keeps families like ours stitched together with trembling, frayed threads. There I sat, the ghost at the feast, invisible and unwanted, my face burning but my hands steady, and in that moment I realized two things with perfect clarity. First, whatever was coming next, it was going to be worse than this. And second, I was done playing by their rules. Have you ever been publicly humiliated by your own family? How would you react if the people you were supposed to trust the most decided you were no longer worth even a few hollow words? I set my glass down carefully, wiped my mouth with my napkin, and leaned back in my chair, watching my mother chatter and laugh as if she had not just gutted me in front of the people who were supposed to matter most. I studied her, really studied her, the way a hunter studies his prey, and I could see the glint in her eye, the smug satisfaction curling at the edges of her mouth. She had planned this, savored it, and she thought she had won. She was wrong. Because while she was busy preening and pretending, I was remembering something she would rather have stayed buried, something that could burn this whole carefully constructed fantasy of hers to the ground. Something she never thought I would have the guts to use. Not until tonight. Not until she made damn sure there was nothing left to lose. It happened when the plates were cleared away, when the last crumbs of roast beef and wilted green beans were scraped into the trash, and the wine glasses were refilled with a heavy, unspoken understanding that we were moving into the final act of whatever little drama my mother had scripted for the evening. Elaine rose from her seat with the kind of deliberate slowness that demanded attention without needing to ask for it, her bony hands smoothing down the front of her peacock blue dress, as if to say, "Watch closely now, I have saved the best for last." The room fell into a hush, so complete you could hear the slight wheeze of the air conditioning struggling against the heat of too many bodies packed into too small a space. Or maybe that was just my own heartbeat thudding in my ears. Because even before she opened her mouth, I could feel it coming, like the static in the air before a lightning strike, a kind of electric inevitability that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "I have one more announcement to make," Elaine said, her voice light and bright and horribly false, the kind of tone someone might use to announce a surprise party, not a public execution. She clutched her wine glass in one hand like a trophy, raising it again as if to toast, and I watched her fingers tremble slightly, the first crack in her carefully composed facade. "I have spent a lot of time thinking," she continued, her eyes sweeping the table, lingering fondly on Samantha and Rick, briefly skimming past Chloe and Uncle Bill, deliberately skipping over me like a bad chapter in a book she did not want to reread. "About the future of our family, about legacy, about what truly matters." The words came out rehearsed, polished within an inch of their lives, and I realized she had probably practiced this speech in the mirror for weeks, maybe months, turning it over and over until it sounded just casual enough to pass as spontaneous. Samantha was sitting bolt upright in her chair, her smile frozen so tightly in place it looked painful, while Rick tapped one foot under the table in a quick, nervous rhythm that betrayed a man who was way more involved in this setup than he would ever dare to admit. Elaine smiled her grand, queenly smile and said, "I have updated my will." That got a reaction, a low murmur that rippled around the table like the first rumble of distant thunder. Chloe blinked rapidly, her mouth opening and closing like a fish yanked out of water, while Uncle Bill let out a grunt that might have been a laugh or a cough or maybe just an expression of pure disbelief. I stayed perfectly still, my hands resting calmly on the table, my face a mask of polite interest, because if there was one thing I had learned growing up in Elaine's house, it was that showing weakness only made the beating worse. "I have decided," she said, drawing the words out like a magician pulling scarves from a sleeve, "to leave everything to Samantha." Another gasp, louder this time, as Samantha's face lit up like a Christmas tree, though she tried to tamp it down into something resembling modest gratitude. Rick reached out and squeezed her hand under the table, a gesture so practiced it made me want to vomit, and for a brief, surreal moment I wondered if they had rehearsed this too. Standing in front of their bathroom mirror coaching each other on how to look surprised without looking greedy. Elaine turned to me then, at last, her eyes bright with the savage glee of someone about to shove a knife between your ribs and pretend they were doing you a favor. "David," she said, with that faux sorrowful tone she reserved for funerals and charity drives, "I have decided that you will no longer be included in the will." The room went dead silent. Not the shocked, expectant silence of a family waiting for someone to speak, but the heavy, suffocating silence of people realizing they are witnessing a slow-motion car crash, and there is nothing they can do to stop it. I felt all their eyes on me, Samantha's bright with triumph, Rick's cautious and calculating, Chloe's wide with horror, Uncle Bill's narrowing with some emotion I couldn't quite name, and still I sat there, unmoving, my wine glass poised in my hand like a prop in a bad play. Inside was another story entirely. Inside, it felt like someone had struck a match and dropped it into a room filled with gasoline, a sudden whoosh of rage and grief and betrayal so overwhelming that for a moment I thought my vision might actually go red like they say it does in bad action movies. I wanted to leap across the table, to scream, to smash my glass against the wall and watch the shards glitter like deadly little stars. I wanted to make her feel an ounce of the humiliation she had just served up to me in front of the only people who were supposed to matter. But I didn't. Instead, I smiled. I smiled the way a boxer smiles when he sees the opening he has been waiting for all night, the split-second slip that means it is finally time to swing with everything he's got. I raised my glass in a slow, almost lazy salute, nodding slightly as if she had just offered me an extra slice of cake instead of gutting me like a fish. "Congratulations, Sam," I said, my voice so calm it scared even me. "You've earned it." There was a beat of silence, a weird, broken moment where nobody knew what to do, how to react. And then Samantha gave a shaky laugh and mumbled something about being honored and humbled while Rick patted her hand and Chloe stared down at her lap like she could disappear into the wood grain if she just wished hard enough. Elaine beamed, basking in the glow of her own cruelty, her fingers tapping a triumphant rhythm against her wine glass, and I realized with a kind of grim clarity that she thought she had won. She thought she had broken me, silenced me, pushed me so far down that I would never rise again, and maybe once upon a time she would have been right. But not tonight. Because tonight, I was holding a card she did not even know existed. And I was about to play it. I sat there, holding the stem of my wine glass with just the lightest pressure, smiling that hollow, polished smile I had perfected over years of family gatherings, school plays where nobody showed up, birthdays forgotten with flimsy excuses, and whispered insults that came wrapped in compliments so pretty you almost hated yourself for feeling the sting. The kind of smile that says, "I see you, I know you, and I am not going to give you the satisfaction of seeing me bleed, no matter how deep you cut." The glass was heavy in my hand, the liquid inside trembling just slightly as my fingers tightened and then relaxed, a careful little dance to make sure I did not shatter it accidentally or, God forbid, on purpose. I raised it slowly, deliberately, turning my head just enough to catch Samantha's self-satisfied smirk, Rick's wary glances, Chloe's wide, uncertain eyes, and Uncle Bill's heavy, considering frown, but I did not meet my mother's gaze because I knew if I did, I might not be able to hold back the tidal wave rising inside me, black and bitter and absolutely ready to drown everything in its path. Instead, I held my smile and sipped my wine, the taste metallic on my tongue, a mockery of celebration, and let my mind slip backward through the years like a movie reel running in reverse, frame by frame revealing all the tiny betrayals that had led to this exact moment, this carefully staged execution where I was expected to smile and applaud my own destruction. I remembered the summer I turned 12, the heat baking the pavement outside while Samantha unwrapped her brand new 10-speed bike, all chrome and red paint gleaming under the sun, while I stood holding a thrift store baseball glove 2 sizes too big. The price tag still dangling from the webbing like an afterthought. I remembered Mom's voice, sweet and sticky as syrup, saying, "Boys don't need much," while she clapped Samantha on the shoulder and called her my little star, the words burning into my ears and settling somewhere deep in my bones where they never quite healed. I remembered sitting in the bleachers alone during my high school graduation, scanning the crowd for a face that never appeared, clutching my diploma with fingers numb from more than just the June heat, telling myself she must have had a good reason, something urgent. Something unavoidable, something that made sense if you just looked at it the right way. Only later did I find out from Uncle Bill that she had skipped it to attend a charity gala across town, where the local paper took her picture smiling under a banner that read, "Commitment to Community." I remembered coming home from college that first Thanksgiving, duffel bag slung over one shoulder, heart hammering with excitement, only to find the locks changed and a note taped to the door that read, "David, stay with Bill, we're remodeling." No call, no warning, just an afterthought scribbled on lined paper like I was a package gone missing in the mail. And I remembered, most vividly of all, the night I showed up unexpectedly, years later, thinking maybe time and distance had softened her, thinking maybe we could start fresh, and finding her hosting a dinner party for Samantha and Rick and half a dozen of her closest friends, none of whom even knew she had a son. I stood there in the doorway while laughter spilled out into the street, holding a cheap bottle of wine in my hand like an idiot, invisible to the woman who had once sworn she would love me no matter what. Those memories rose inside me now, thick and choking, 1,000 tiny cuts that had finally bled me dry, and yet I still smiled, still held my glass aloft in a mock toast to the family who had decided they were better off without me. Because if Elaine had taught me anything, It was how to wear the right mask, how to survive in a room full of knives without ever letting them see you flinch. From the corner of my eye, I saw Samantha watching me, her expression flickering between gloating and suspicion, as if she could not quite figure out why I was not crumbling, why I was not begging or raging or making a scene like she had probably hoped. Rick leaned in slightly, murmuring something to her behind his hand, and Samantha gave a little shake of her head, her smile faltering just a fraction, and I felt a dark, savage satisfaction twist in my chest. They were waiting for me to react. They were waiting for me to fall apart. And I was going to make them wait a hell of a lot longer. Because the thing about wearing a mask for so long is that eventually it stops feeling like a disguise and starts feeling like armor, and right now mine was bulletproof. I tilted my glass slightly in a mock salute toward Samantha and Rick, savoring the way Samantha stiffened in her seat, and then turned my head slowly, deliberately, locking eyes with my mother at last. Elaine's smile did not falter, but there was a tightness around her mouth now, a flicker of something uncertain in her gaze, as if for the first time she was realizing that maybe, just maybe, she had miscalculated. I let the moment stretch out, a taut, electric silence filled only by the faint clink of silverware and the soft murmur of Chloe whispering something frantic to Uncle Bill. I took another sip of wine, savoring the taste of anticipation more than the bitter liquid itself, and thought, "You wanted a show, Mother. You are going to get one. But not yet. Because the real art of revenge, the kind that leaves scars instead of bruises, is knowing when to wait, when to let the blade sink in slow enough that they do not even realize they are bleeding until it is far too late to stop the bleeding. And I had waited this long. A few minutes more would not kill me, but they might just kill her. So I smiled again, wider this time, the kind of smile that shows all your teeth, the kind of smile you give right before you rip something to shreds, and I raised my glass a little higher, savoring the growing confusion and unease around the table. Savoring the delicious tension straining at the seams of this perfect little dinner party. Let them wonder what I was planning. Let them twist themselves into knots trying to guess. Because the truth was, even I did not know exactly how this was going to end. Only that it would end. And that when it did, no one at this table would ever be able to pretend they had not seen it coming. The wine was beginning to taste sour on my tongue, like something left out too long, forgotten and spoiled, but I kept drinking anyway, letting the heavy burn of it anchor me to my chair as the conversations around the table tried and failed to resurrect themselves. It was almost funny, in a grim, pathetic way, how quickly people will reach for the comfort of small talk when faced with something ugly they do not want to acknowledge, how they will chatter about weather and television shows and vacation plans with brittle, desperate cheerfulness, as if enough noise could somehow drown out the reality rotting just beneath the surface. Samantha was laughing too loud at something Rick said, her voice wobbling at the edges, and Chloe kept checking her phone even though there was no signal out here in the middle of nowhere, while Uncle Bill poured himself another finger of gin with the steady hand of a man who had seen worse, but was smart enough to know better than to get involved. And Elaine, well, Elaine sat at the head of the table with her back straight and her hands folded neatly in front of her face an immovable mask of satisfaction, as if the messy little scene she had orchestrated had gone off without a hitch, and she could now sit back and enjoy the rewards of her cruelty. Except she was wrong. Because tucked deep inside me, behind the mask and the smile and the fake, polite nodding along, was a secret so heavy, so poisonous, that just thinking about it made my hands tremble under the table. A secret that could shatter her carefully cultivated image of perfection into 1,000 bloody shards and drag Samantha and Rick down with her. A secret I had carried like a stone in my gut for years. Too heavy to throw away, but too dangerous to ever fully set down. And now, as I watched Elaine sip her wine and bask in the glow of her small victory, I realized with the kind of cold, clear certainty that only comes when you have nothing left to lose that I could drop that stone at her feet right now and watch her stumble over it, fall face first into the wreckage she had built with her own lies. But there was something else, too, something colder and harder gnawing at the edges of my resolve, the question of whether I could live with it afterward. Whether revenge would feel as sweet as it did in my imagination, or whether it would taste bitter and empty once it was done, another hollow victory in a life already full of them. I remembered the night I found out, years ago now, back when Samantha and Rick were just newly married and riding the high of being mom's golden children, untouchable and adored. I had come over unexpectedly, some stupid impulse to try and patch things up, and stumbled onto a conversation not meant for my ears. Voices raised in the kitchen, accusations flying like knives. Elaine had needed money, real money, more than her carefully maintained lifestyle could support, and the charity gala circuit was not bringing in the donations like it used to. She had cooked up a plan with Samantha and Rick, something small at first, just a little creative accounting, padding invoices, siphoning off funds from one of the family trusts that had been set up decades ago by a grandfather none of us had ever met, but who had apparently been smart enough to squirrel away a decent fortune. What started as a little harmless borrowing spiraled fast, as those things always do when nobody is watching too closely and everyone has mouths to feed and appearances to maintain. Before long, it was full-on embezzlement, cloaked in enough red tape and shell companies that it would take a forensic accountant weeks to unravel it all. They had gotten away with it clean because no one ever thinks to question the perfect family, the smiling matriarch, the golden daughter, the charming son-in-law. And me? I was the insurance policy, the expendable one, the scapegoat if things ever went south. I was the name buried deep in the paperwork, the loose end they could tie up with a nice little bow of blame if anyone ever started asking questions. I knew this because I had seen the paperwork, too, tucked away in a file folder Samantha had carelessly left out one night after too many glasses of wine, and though I had never said a word, never even hinted that I knew, I had kept those copies locked away for a rainy day. Well, it was raining now. I felt the weight of that knowledge pressing against my ribs, cold and relentless, demanding action, demanding justice, demanding blood. Part of me wanted to stand up right there, slam the papers down on the table, watch their faces crumble into horror and guilt and fear. Part of me wanted to burn it all down, to tear away the shiny, fake surface and show the world what kind of rot lay underneath. But another part, smaller but no less insistent, whispered that once I crossed that line, there would be no coming back. That some things, once broken, can never be mended, no matter how much you might wish otherwise. That vengeance has a way of consuming the one who wields it, hollowing you out until you are just another bitter, empty shell. I closed my eyes for a moment, breathing slow and deep, trying to weigh the hunger for revenge against the cost of getting it. I could see their faces in my mind's eye, see the way Samantha would cry and plead, the way Rick would bluster and lie, the way Elaine would go cold and cruel, snapping into damage control mode before the first tear even hit the floor. And I could see myself, too, not triumphant, not vindicated, but alone, standing in the ashes of a family I already barely recognized, wondering if it had been worth it, knowing deep down that it probably never could be. I opened my eyes and smiled again, a real smile this time, thin and sharp as a blade, because the choice was no longer about whether or not to act. It was about when. Timing, Elaine always said, was everything. And I intended to choose mine with deadly precision. The secret weapon was already cocked and loaded. All that was left was to decide how much of the house I wanted to burn down when I finally pulled the trigger. The conversation around the table had slumped into that uneasy, meandering rhythm families sometimes find when the air is thick with things nobody dares to say, when every word feels like a placeholder for the real sentences bubbling underneath. Sentences packed with barbed wire and broken glass. Elaine was still smiling that stiff, polished smile of hers, but her fingers drummed lightly against the side of her wine glass now, an impatient staccato beat she probably thought nobody noticed, yet I watched it like a hawk watches the trembling of a mouse about to bolt. I could feel the pressure building behind my teeth, the surge of words begging to break loose, and for a moment I almost let them slip out raw and furious, a damn burst of rage that would leave nothing standing. But I held it back, forcing myself to breathe slow and even, because rage is messy and obvious, and what I needed tonight was something cleaner, something surgical. The slow pull of a thread that would unravel the entire beautiful tapestry my mother had spent a lifetime weaving for herself. So I set my fork down with a deliberate clink, wiped my mouth neatly with a napkin, and let the silence stretch out just a little longer, until every eye at the table was flicking nervously toward me and back again. Until the tension was a living thing breathing right alongside us. Then, in a voice so calm it scared even me, I said, "Funny thing about family secrets, isn't it? No matter how deep you bury them, they always have a way of clawing back to the surface." Elaine's smile faltered, just for a fraction of a second, so fast anyone else might have missed it, but I caught it, and I savored it the way a starving man savors a first bite of food. Samantha made a strangled little noise in her throat, and Rick shifted in his seat like a man realizing too late that he had built his house on quicksand. Chloe looked from one to the other, her wide eyes starting like a trapped bird's, while Uncle Bill leaned back in his chair with a low grunt that could have meant anything but somehow felt like encouragement. "I've been thinking a lot lately," I continued, still in that same quiet, methodical tone, about how families survive. About the stories we tell to keep everything looking pretty on the outside, even when it's rotting underneath. Elaine opened her mouth, maybe to cut me off, maybe to laugh and steer us back into safer waters, but I lifted one finger, just one, and she froze like a puppet with its strings suddenly tangled. I leaned forward slightly, locking eyes with her, and said, "Remember when you got sick, Mom? Really sick. Cancer, you told everyone." The word hit the table like a grenade. For a long moment, nobody moved, nobody spoke, as if the very sound of it had stunned them into paralysis. Then, slowly, the murmurs began, Samantha letting out a high, breathy laugh that died almost instantly, Rick shaking his head with tight little jerks like he could physically reject the direction this conversation was going, Chloe whispering something frantic to Uncle Bill that he ignored completely. Elaine recovered first. Of course she did, because she had spent her whole life mastering the art of the quick pivot, the polished performance. She laughed lightly, waving one manicured hand through the air like she was shooing away a silly, childish ghost. "David," she said, her voice full of forced amusement, "we don't need to dredge up all that unpleasantness tonight. It's my birthday, after all." "But see," I said, still smiling, still deadly calm, "it's not really unpleasantness when it's fiction, is it? It's not painful when it's a con job. You weren't sick. You never had cancer. You faked the whole thing." A collective gasp rippled around the table, sharp and instinctive, and for the first time all evening, every single eye was locked on me. I could see it in their faces, disbelief, horror, the desperate scramble to deny what they had just heard, to shove it back into the box where ugly truths belong. Elaine's mask cracked then, a tiny fissure right down the center of her perfect smile, and I pressed forward, relentless now, each word slicing clean and deep. "You lied to your friends. You lied to your family. You lied to everyone who ever gave you a damn cent to help with treatment. You took their money, their sympathy, their tears, and you spent it on vacations, on renovations, on that damn facelift you pretended was medically necessary." Samantha shoved back from the table so hard her chair scraped a jagged line across the hardwood floor. "That's not true," she said, her voice shaking with fury and fear. "You don't know what you're talking about." I turned to her slowly, savoring the growing panic in her eyes. "Don't I?" I said softly. "You helped her cook the books, Sam. You and Rick. You hid the payments, you laundered the donations through fake charities. You're just as guilty as she is." Rick surged to his feet, his face an ugly, mottled red, but he had no words, no defense, just a furious sputtering that made him look small and stupid and exactly as culpable as he was. Chloe gasped audibly, tears springing to her eyes, while Uncle Bill just sat there, one eyebrow raised, watching the whole scene unfold like a man who had been waiting years for this exact explosion. Elaine stood now too, but there was no grand gesture left in her, no royal command to put the pieces back together. She looked at me, really looked at me, and for the first time I saw fear there, raw and ugly and real. "You have no proof," she hissed, low and vicious. I smiled again, the same smile that had carried me through every petty humiliation, every knife in the back, every lonely night spent wondering why I had never been good enough for the woman who claimed to love me. "I have everything," I said, voice steady as stone. "Bank records, emails, letters, even a few recordings, thanks to Rick's bad habit of forgetting to turn off his phone before scheming." The chaos that erupted then was almost beautiful in its way. Samantha sobbing, Rick shouting, Chloe running from the room with her hands over her mouth, Uncle Bill chuckling darkly into his gin. And in the center of it all, Elaine swaying slightly, clutching the back of her chair for support, her face a twisted mask of rage and terror and something else too, something like grief. But not for what she had done. Only for the fact that she had finally been caught. For a few terrible seconds after the words left my mouth and the truth lay there between us like something bloody and wounded on the fine linen tablecloth, there was only silence, thick and suffocating and filled with the sound of everybody's careful, curated world cracking apart at the seams. It was not the kind of silence that invites peace or understanding, but the violent, loaded silence before a storm, the kind that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up because you know there is no way out of what's coming next. Then it happened, fast and loud and messy, just like I knew it would, because families like ours do not fall apart quietly, they explode in spectacular, humiliating fashion, dragging every buried resentment and every whispered betrayal into the light whether you want them or not. Samantha was the first to break, because of course she was, standing up so fast, she knocked over her wine glass, the red liquid bleeding across the white tablecloth like a wound. Her face twisted into something between rage and hysteria as she pointed a shaking finger at me. "You're just jealous," she shrieked, her voice pitching higher with every word until it almost cracked. "You've always been jealous, because Mom loved me more, because I made something of myself and you couldn't stand it." For a moment, I just stared at her, stunned by the sheer audacity of it, the way she could twist even this mountain of evidence, this screaming, undeniable truth, into something that made her the victim and me the villain. I opened my mouth to answer, but Rick cut in first, slamming his palm down on the table so hard the dishes rattled, his face purple with anger. "You don't know what you're talking about, you little shit," he barked, jabbing a finger toward me like he was laying down a gauntlet. "You've always been a screw-up, David. Always looking for someone else to blame for your own pathetic life." Across the table, Chloe was crying quietly now, her hands twisted together in her lap, her head shaking back and forth in tiny, desperate motions like she could erase what she was hearing if she just refused to accept it. Uncle Bill, meanwhile, looked almost amused, leaning back in his chair with a drink dangling from his fingers, watching the chaos unfold like a man who had long ago given up any hope of saving the building and was now just enjoying the fire. Elaine had not moved, not spoken since I dropped the bomb, but her eyes were fixed on me, burning with a hatred so raw it almost took my breath away, a look that said she would destroy me for this, if it was the last thing she ever did. But even she knew there was no stuffing this back into the box, no way to charm or lie or guilt-trip her way out of this one. The truth was out, and it was ugly and it was loud, and it had turned her birthday party into a battlefield. I pushed my chair back slowly, the leg scraping against the hardwood with an awful, drawn-out squeal that seemed to slice through the shouting, the accusations, the rising tide of noise. I stood up, feeling strangely calm, almost detached, like I was watching all of this happen from a great distance, as if it were a scene from a play I had seen 100 times before. Maybe, in a way, it was. I didn't come here looking for a fight, I said, my voice low but steady enough to cut through the clamor. I didn't come here to destroy anyone. I came because I was tired of living under a lie. Tired of pretending everything was fine when it was never fine. Samantha laughed then, a short, bitter bark that held no humor at all, and said, "You're pathetic, David. You think outing Mom makes you some kind of hero? You think that changes anything?" I looked at her for a long moment, really looked at her, the brittle anger, the fear twisting just beneath the surface, the desperate clinging to the fairy tale she had built her entire life on, and I realized that in some ways, she was even more trapped by Elaine's lies than I had ever been. She needed the illusion of a perfect family, a perfect mother, a perfect life, because without it she had nothing left to stand on. "I don't think it changes anything," I said finally, and the simple truth of it settled over the room like a fresh weight. "I think it reveals everything." The silence that followed was different this time, heavier, sadder, like the silence that comes after a funeral, when the last shovelful of dirt has been thrown and all that's left is the slow, aching process of figuring out how to live with what's been lost. Chloe got up first, wiping at her eyes with the sleeve of her dress, and stumbled toward the door without a word. Uncle Bill finished his drink, set the glass down with a quiet clink, and followed her, giving me a long, unreadable look as he passed. Samantha and Rick stayed rooted in their places, too angry or too proud or too stubborn to move, while Elaine slowly sank back into her chair, her hands trembling in her lap. The proud queen finally toppled, but too proud to fall with any grace. I stood there for a long moment, feeling the cold creep of doubt slithering up my spine, the whispering question that had been waiting for me since the moment I opened my mouth. Was it worth it? Was this hollow victory, this scorched earth ruin of a family gathering, really what I had wanted all along? Had I become the very thing I despised, a destroyer, a betrayer, someone who chose vengeance over forgiveness, even if forgiveness had never truly been on the table? I didn't have an answer, not then, maybe not ever. All I knew was that the air tasted different now, raw and sharp and free, and that for the first time in as long as I could remember, I was not carrying the weight of their lies anymore. They could have them. They could keep their gilded cages and their poisoned fairy tales. I was done. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the dining room, my footsteps echoing against the hardwood floor, each step feeling lighter than the last. I didn't look back. I didn't need to, because some bridges aren't meant to be crossed again. Some bridges are meant to be burned. The night air hit me like a slap, cool and sharp and full of the kind of bitter clarity that only comes when everything you thought you knew lies in broken pieces behind you. I stood on the porch for a long moment, breathing it in, letting it fill my lungs and steady my hands, listening to the faint echoes of chaos still swirling inside the house I had once called home. The windows glowed warmly in the darkness, but the light felt false now, a flickering illusion of safety and belonging that I would never again mistake for the real thing. Behind me, the door creaked open, and I heard the soft shuffle of feet, the low murmur of voices trying to make sense of what could never be made right again. I didn't turn around. I didn't want to see their faces, drawn and twisted by anger and fear and grief, didn't want to give them one more piece of me to pick apart and devour like they always had. Instead, I started down the steps, the gravel crunching under my shoes, each step a small act of rebellion, a small act of freedom. It would have been easier if it had ended there, if I could have just walked away clean, left them to stew in the wreckage of their own making while I moved forward into something new and untainted. But life rarely ties itself up so neatly, and some part of me, the part that had spent years craving their approval, their love, their goddamn recognition, still twisted painfully in my chest, still wanted to look back, still wanted them to come running after me. To say, "You were right, we were wrong, come home." They didn't, of course. Instead, after a long stretch of silence broken only by the faint whine of the wind against the eaves, the door shut behind me with a soft but final click, a sound that felt more like a verdict than anything Elaine had said that night. I kept walking, Not trusting myself to look back, not trusting myself to stay strong if I saw Samantha's tear-streaked face or Rick's furious glare or, worst of all, my mother's cold, pitiless smile. The driveway seemed longer than I remembered, each step stretching out into eternity. Every memory I had tried to bury clawing its way to the surface. Christmas mornings spent pretending not to notice that Samantha's pile of gifts dwarfed mine. School plays performed to an empty seat where a parent should have been, late-night phone calls ignored or dismissed with icy efficiency. They rose around me like ghosts, whispering accusations and regrets I had no defense against. I reached my car, fumbling the keys with numb fingers, and sat there for a long moment behind the wheel, staring at the house through the windshield, the perfect little picture of suburban success cracking at the edges. I could see them moving inside, shadows crossing windows, voices rising and falling in the kind of angry, panicked tones that meant blame was already being assigned, alliances already being redrawn. And I wondered, not for the first time and certainly not for the last, whether I had really won anything at all tonight. Justice had a taste to it, I realized, and it wasn't sweet or triumphant the way I had always imagined. It was bitter and cold, and it left a film in your mouth like ash, the kind you can't quite wash away no matter how many times you spit or rinse or pray. It didn't feel like victory, it felt like survival, and maybe that was the best anyone could ever hope for when dealing with people who made love a currency to be traded and withheld. I rested my forehead against the steering wheel, letting the weight of it all press down for a moment, and let myself wonder, had I done the right thing? Had I struck a necessary blow against the lie that had choked me for so long, or had I simply sunk to their level, playing the same ugly games with higher stakes and sharper knives? Maybe it didn't matter. Maybe there were no right choices in a family like mine, only different flavors of wrong. The engine coughed to life under my hands, a low, rumbling sound that seemed to vibrate straight through my bones, and I pulled out of the driveway without looking back, without offering a final glance at the house that had stolen so much from me. I told myself that forward was the only direction that mattered now, that freedom was a prize worth the price I had paid. And yet, even as I drove away into the night, the road stretching out endlessly ahead, a small voice gnawed at the edges of my mind, whispering doubts I couldn't quite shake. Because the truth was, I hadn't revealed everything that night. There were still secrets curled tight inside me, darker ones that would have scorched the earth beyond recognition if I had chosen to wield them. I had held back. I had chosen mercy or maybe cowardice, depending on how you looked at it. And maybe that was the most damning truth of all, that even now, after everything, part of me still wanted to protect them, to shield them from the full, brutal consequences of their own actions. Maybe some part of me was still that little boy standing on the sidelines, waiting for someone to notice him, to love him, to choose him. Maybe I would always be that boy. I do not know if I made the right choice that night. I do not know if justice was served, or if I simply added my own hands to the long, bloody history of betrayal that shaped our family into what it became. I only know that when I looked into the rearview mirror, the house was already disappearing behind me, swallowed by the dark, and for the first time in a very long time, I did not feel the need to chase after it. Maybe that is enough. Maybe that is all any of us can hope for. But what do you think? Did I do the right thing, or did I just become another version of her, another smiling face hiding a dagger behind my back? I am still not sure. Maybe I will never be.